Welcome to the Radiant Life podcast. I am your host, Tatiana, and I am a master mindset coach, and I'm obsessed with empowering you to live and create your best life possible. If you're looking to uplevel your mindset, life, happiness, and success, then you are in the right place. My goal with this podcast is to help you see the potential within yourself, to be able to break the limiting beliefs and habits that are holding you back, and to help you feel inspired to get clear with who you are in order to create the life you desire. Thank you so much for listening. Now let's get into today's episode. Hello, and welcome to the Radiant Life podcast. Today's episode, I am talking about failure, overcoming the fear of it, what it has taught me. And today's episode was inspired based off conversations I've had with women the last couple of weeks, because let's be real, no one likes the feeling of failure, and so many of us fear it. And so much so that we don't take action because we fear failure so much. So today's episode, I want to share with you what failure has taught me and how I have overcame the fear of failure, and how you can do so as well. Depending on whatever it is you're fearing of failing, doesn't matter. I want to help you overcome that fear, right? So growing up, honestly, until probably I was 22, so about 4 years ago, maybe even, I don't know, 2 to 4 years ago, let's just say, I used to not do things based of fear, fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of looking stupid, being wrong, whatever it meant, right? And so I literally lived my life just so confused. I was so indecisive. I would not make decisions for myself. I would rely on other people giving me other advice, giving me a decision to make, because it was easier that way. It was easier to do what others told me to do than taking the risk of doing what I wanted to do and perhaps failing, right? Because if I failed, well, then I had somebody to excuse, or I could excuse whatever, them, my actions, instead of facing a quote unquote failure, right? And when it shifted for me was, I would say, when I was in corporate and I was hating my job and I was just sitting there and I was like, okay, clearly I've made so many decisions based on fear and others' opinions. You gotta get a degree. So I went to college. You should get a good degree in a good major so you can get a good job, a high paying job, and just work for the rest of your life, right? Like, I was just doing it based on society's norms, on others' opinions, whatever. And when I was sitting there in corporate, I was like, I'm so unhappy and I can't do this anymore. And I don't know, I probably was listening to a podcast one day, or I used to love listening to Andy Frisella and Les Brown when I would walk during my lunch breaks. And it just hit me. I was like, I'm done. I'd rather fail trying to do what made me happy and living a life of my dreams than not even taking the chance and being miserable and content and living out the worst case scenario. Because at that time, I was already in the worst case. I was living at home. I was in a job I didn't like. So what else did I have to lose, right? I was already unhappy. And we all experience this. I mean, the fear of failure, it's scary, right? We don't want to look stupid. We don't want to fail. We don't want to come off wrong. And this all just stems from childhood, right? I mean, probably for you, maybe something happened in the classroom or when you were playing a game, or I don't even know really where that first sense of fear of failure came from for me. But we all have it. So don't think you're the only one that fears failure. But at the end of the day, you can't allow that to stop you from doing what you want and being who you want to be deep down. And so as I started my business, as I quit my corporate job, as I moved to Florida, I experienced, quote unquote, lots and lots of failures in the eyes of people who are looking outside, right? So launching my business, having launches where no one would sign up, no one would show up on my workshop calls, on my Facebook Lives. I had the sensation of failing when I got a part-time job at Orange Theory just to help with expenses and paying my bills. I felt like I had failed my business because I had to get a job. And if you're an entrepreneur or trying to start your own business, getting a side hustle, just a side note here, does not mean you are a failure. It is there to help you. It is there to help conserve your energy, to bring income while you're building your baby and your business. So do not think a side hustle is failure. But at the end of the day, out of all of these setbacks, out of all of these quote unquote failures and launches that nobody joined and programs and workshops, all of these things. What it has taught me is that there is no failure. Failure does not exist. It is only and always feedback. It's feedback to change. It's feedback to pivot and do something else, try something else. Because you know what? Maybe you're not in alignment. I wasn't in alignment in a few things. So my last quote unquote failure was my launch back in January 2020. I was a weight loss coach at that time. I launched it and I failed. I don't think anybody joined. Maybe one person did. So it was a fail in my book compared to previous launches. And this is when I really realized that failure doesn't exist. It's only feedback. Because if it wasn't for that launch and if it wasn't for that quote unquote failure, I would have never had the slap in the face that I needed to be like, what are you doing? You are not in alignment. This is not what you want to do. And because of that, I was able to make a pivot, get really, really clear with myself, do a lot of inner work, and realize like, okay, I was doing things based on what other people were doing, or I felt like I had to, this is where limiting beliefs come up, and this is a whole other story, but I just was trying to do things based on what I saw, based on friends online who were in health coaching, and I wasn't being true to myself. And that was an opportunity for me to pivot, to look inward and reevaluate. And like, it was a huge slap across the face, but it's been the biggest, most impactful shift in my life. And so if I look at it as a failure, then I wouldn't look at it as a success, that it's absolutely changed my life and my business now, right? And I tell everybody this, if you're listening to this, if you're my friend, if you're my client, or if you don't know me at all, it doesn't matter. If you talk to me and you say, well, I'm scared of failing, I will always cut you off and say, how are you afraid of failing when failure doesn't exist? It's only feedback. We're literally in a society where we just expect things instantly. We just expect success instantly, like the overnight success, right? That's not what happens. When you go out and do things, you're going to have setbacks, you're going to have challenges, you're going to have obstacles. And at the end of the day, it's all lessons that we need to learn to teach us to become the best version of ourselves, right? I mean, think of it this way. I think it was Benjamin Franklin. I could be totally wrong. Somebody said, well, you failed so many times. And he's like, no, I didn't. I just found 10,000 ways not to do it, right? So what if he let all those setbacks and challenges and quote unquote failures get to him? What if he had given up? I mean, we wouldn't have electricity the way we do now, right? And so we need to realize that failure doesn't exist. It's there to teach us a lesson. It's there to help us pivot and look at it from a different lens, from a different perspective. And how can I go about this in a different way? Am I being true to myself? Am I aligned, right? And I tell everybody this. So if you're sitting here and you're like, okay, I get it, but I still feel a failure. What if I fail, right? Okay. Ask yourself, what's the worst case scenario? And just imagine it and have it in your head, right? Okay, cool. Now you have an idea, big whoop. And now you can think of a plan, worst case scenario, this happens. So for me, when I quit my job with no job planned and moved to Florida, my worst case scenario was, well, it didn't work out and I had to move back home, right? That was my worst case scenario. And I literally was like, I'm pretty much living my worst case scenario. I live at home already. I'm working a job I hate. I have nothing else to lose. And worst case scenario, I just go back home. It's not the end of the world for me, right? And this has happened so many times over and over again. What's the worst case scenario of a failed launch? I try again. Or what's the worst case scenario? Maybe I just get a part-time job just to help me, bring the money in while I reevaluate and shift perspectives, whatever it was. Map out the worst case scenario and then just leave it there. That doesn't mean it's going to happen. You've acknowledged it, you figured it out, and then you can be like, oh, okay, you know what? Like the worst case scenario really isn't that bad, right? And now I want you to ask yourself, okay, what if you fail? Great, worst case scenario, you have that in your head. I want to ask you, what if you succeed? What would happen? Because so many of us just look at what could go wrong. Looking at life through the lens of it going wrong. What if I fail? What will people say? How will I feel? Right? And that we get so caught up in all the possibilities of everything that could go wrong and failing that we don't even look at what would happen if it went right. And remember, what we focus on attracts. If you're going to focus on what you don't want, guess what's going to happen? That's going to happen. So why don't you acknowledge what you don't want? What's the worst case scenario? And then think about, but what if I fucking succeed? Who would I become? What would I achieve? Who would I impact? Whatever it is, right? And focus on what you want. Getting a little passionate here because I find, and I speak to so many people, men, women of all ages, and the number one thing that's holding them back from becoming the best version of themselves or doing what their heart's desires, whether it's quitting their job, making a career change, starting a business, moving out of state, is because they are scared and they are living in fear and fear of failure. We have one life to live. Why not just give it a chance? I mean, I don't know about you, but we have one life. I'm going to live it up. And I'm going to have failures or whatever you want to call it now, because again, failure doesn't exist in my book. I mean, I don't want to live a life just being in my comfort zone. And, that's a whole different conversation. But at the end of the day, your desires are in your heart for a reason. And if you're going to allow the fear of failure to hold yourself back, you are holding yourself back from living the most best, happiest dream life that you can imagine. And I'm telling you this because I am living it. I looked at fear, the fear of failure, eye to eye, and I was like, I'm not scared of you because you don't exist. And even if I quote unquote fail, you're going to teach me something. You're going to help me expand. You're going to allow me to grow as a person and think differently. And honestly, starting my own business has been the biggest challenge and life lessons, not only about myself and the inner work I've had done, but just everything. I've learned more being an entrepreneur than I ever did as an engineer in my degree, right? So I looked at it and I was like, I don't care. I don't fear you anymore. I'm going to do it because at the end of the day, I'm going to learn something from it. And then when you can look at life through the lens of life is always happening for me, no matter if it's good or bad, at the end of the day, that's just a label and a meaning you're putting at something. It's always happening for me. And even if it sucks, even if I had no one sign up, I'm here and I sit there and I'm like, okay, these feelings suck. I feel all the feelings. And I'm like, what is this teaching me? What do I need to learn here, right? And when you can see things in that perspective, life will always happen for me. And if it doesn't go the way I want, it's here to help me grow and it's here to teach me a lesson. How can you fear that? Because that just means you're growing and evolving as a human, and that's what we're all here for. So I hope this is a sign to fucking do what's on your heart right now. Push through that fear. Courage is the gap between the low vibrational states of fear and anger and all those low and the high vibrations. Courage is the gap, having the courage to overcome that fear. So push through it, because when you do that, you move up a level. Think of a video game. You're at level 5 now, right? Then you go to 6 and 7. You just keep elevating and elevating until you reach your main goal or desire. At the end of the day, failure doesn't exist. It's only feedback. Okay? I hope this was a little eye-opener for you. I love when I have this conversation with people. I literally see the light bulb go off in their head and they're like, whoa, I have never thought of looking at failure like that, right? They never saw it as that perspective. So I hope this was a whole different lens that I've blessed you with to see failure as now. It's only feedback. It's only here to help teach you a lesson, to help you pivot, to reevaluate things, shift your perspective, whatever it is, because I don't know what you're working on. But at the end of the day, it is only feedback. Failure doesn't exist. Okay. Well, that concludes today's episode. I hope you enjoyed hearing what failure, quote unquote, has taught me. And I hope this is inspiring you to go do whatever is on your heart and stop looking at it with fear. Ask yourself why. What's the worst case scenario? Feel those feelings and then let go. Surrender. It's here to teach you a lesson, even if the worst case scenario happens. All right. Well, thank you all so much for listening. I hope this was impactful for you. If it was, take a screenshot, share it with me on Instagram. I absolutely love getting your shares, getting your aha moments, your feedback. I absolutely love it. I appreciate you all so much. If you know of somebody who fears failure so much and they have so much potential, send them this episode. Hopefully it ignites a fire within you and within them to go chase your dreams. Okay? okay? Thank you guys so
Thank
much
you
for listening.
so much for tuning in
the
today.
next
If you
episode.
enjoyed this episode, please share it with me and write an Apple iTunes review so I can keep the good stuff coming your way. If you aren't following me already, you can find me on Instagram at Tatiana_Kuto. I appreciate you so much and cannot wait to see you in the next episode. In the meantime, continue to shine bright and embrace your radiance.